And now to provide an introduction for the rest of today's program, I'd like to introduce Jason Kolbert. Jason has had the privilege of viewing the healthcare field from many angles, earlier in his career as a product manager for Schering-Plough and later as a healthcare strategist for Salomon Smith Barney. Prior to his current position with Maxim, Jason managed a healthcare fund and then later founded the firm's side cell biotechnology team. In his current role, Jason is the Managing Director of Biotechnology Research for Maxim Group, a leading investment banking, securities, and investment management fund. Jason will be moderating today's panel on clinical outlooks in cardiovascular disease. Jason.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And I especially want to say good morning to the institutional portfolio managers who are present in the room. Our target, it's great to see the companies together. It's great to see the CEOs and the CSOs and the CMOs. And certainly it can be a cell therapy love-in. And I've been to a lot of those in the past. But our goal today really was to move beyond that and was to have real institutional interest in this sector. One of the things that's really neat about this sector is how far it's come. Kieran alluded to this a little bit in his discussion about prior paradigms and monoclonal antibodies, and I certainly could make those analogies here. I went back last night and I looked at some of the things that I was saying about cell therapy just 3 years ago in 2010. And in 2010, I published a report, and I realized that I had said that the entire market capitalization of all of the public cell therapy companies was $1.6 billion. Last night, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and that number has now grown to $4 billion. So clearly, we are seeing interest rising in the space. I know that I ran into Silvio earlier, and he will be on the panel today, the CEO of Mesoblast. Mesoblast itself is a $2 billion market cap company today with about $350 million in cash, and in a really fascinating capital raise, raised approximately $175 million overnight. You know, those types of transactions were absolutely not possible in this space just 3 years ago. So clearly, proof of concept is upon us today in cell therapy. Thinking a lot about what the strategy was for today, I counseled with ARM and with Maury Ruffin and got together with Ted Tentoff and Red Benjamin, and we thought, what would be a really good program that would bring value? And we came to the conclusion that we needed a couple of things to be done differently than what's been done in the past. And that is, let's get a program together and focus on a couple of the hot areas. I'm very lucky because I think I got the easy panel, which is cardiology. And we're going to talk a lot about cardiology. Dr. Les Miller is going to help us understand what the real need is in the cardiac space. And then I believe we have true representative companies that will give us views into the different approaches that these companies are taking. What's really exciting is we're talking about the transition from phase 2 to phase 3 data. And so I think you're going to see real value inflections in the companies that are going to be up on the panel today in cardiology. Now, I worked really hard over the last couple of weeks, and I worked very closely with most of the CEOs in the CNS space, and we published a CNS report. And I have to tell you, it's really, really difficult to tackle CNS. My heart goes out to Ren Benjamin, who will be moderating that panel. It is going to be difficult. Why is it so difficult? Because CNS is, in many ways, where cardiology was 5 years ago. CNS is still looking for proof of concept. So in the report that we published, we tried to focus on a couple of themes in the CNS space. We tried to focus on what is the preclinical data? What is the dose? How viable are those animal models, and how do they translate into man? And when can you really establish proof of concept in man? And then we've tried to apply those concepts to the work that's happening in stroke and in Lou Gehrig's disease and in macular degeneration. And we think that those are really exciting areas. And we came away with a couple of conclusions, that you are going to see multiple combinations of cell therapy. Mesoblast, for example, is working in wet macular degeneration. Well, that's a $2 billion market easily. But on the dry macular degeneration, advanced cell therapies and stem cells are working to basically help people that are losing their sight, that they may be able to see again. And I think that works really exciting. People are not taking the Athersys trial in stroke seriously, but the Athersys trial could be transformative in stroke. And we see lots of opportunities both for what I'm going to call the trophic effects of cell therapy in CNS, as well as the real underlying holy grail of cell therapy, which is kind of rebuilding lost tissue. And certainly in the wound healing and tissue engineering space, you'll see dramatic examples of the progress that's being made. In fact, Harvard Apparatus was just recently working and considering spinning out that division, and I spent a lot of time with that management team, and I saw just how far they've come in terms of the ability to create a plastic larynx coated with ciliated tracheal cells and essentially keep people alive that would otherwise be dead. So it's very, very dramatic, the opportunities that we're seeing in the space. I absolutely believe it's real. I wanted to close with you before we start the cardiac panel with something that's really controversial. And if you know me, you know that that's where I really like to be. It has to do with a FDA 361 1271.10a. It has to do with the use and your ability as a physician or as a company to use cell therapy without clinical trials. And I want everyone to be really clear that I am an absolute advocate of doing the clinical trials. One of the things that we're going to focus on in the cardiology panel is, what is the clinical plan? I mean, it's absolutely critical, and by no way, means, shape, or form am I saying that companies don't have to run clinical trials. But the fact is that MiMedx will be presenting this afternoon. They are projecting $40 to $60 million in revenues using choriotic and amniotic membranes for wound healing, and they're operating under 361-1271. And I think that's really fascinating because this is an interesting space. But where it becomes really interesting for me is the fact that I'm not just an analyst. I'm actually a patient. In January, I rotated my ankle in a really severe injury, and I went and I saw an orthopedic surgeon, my next-door neighbor. I went to the hospital, I got an MRI, and I was told that I would need a soft cast for 3 to 6 months. That I was really looking at an extended recovery. And, you know, I was really disappointed. I wanted to love skiing in the winter. I have 2 teenage sons. So I was thinking, are there any alternatives? And I know this is controversial, but I met Stephen Victor. And Stephen Victor runs a state-of-the-art clinic in Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and he uses cell therapy, uses a process of sonification, and he extracts from a lipoaspirate cells. And I called Stephen, and Stephen said, sure, come in and have the procedure. And I did, and so my belly probably looks a little bit thinner today. But actually, it was a very small lipoaspirate. And from that aspirate, Stephen was able to acquire 1 million cells. 50 million cells were injected locally into my ankle and 700 million systemically, IV. And I have to tell you, that night when I went home, my ankle was on fire. What was amazing was the next morning, I was pain-free. And within 2 weeks, I was skiing with my sons. We filmed the entire procedure. Everything from the state of my ankle before the therapy to the state of my ankle and my ability in the weeks afterwards. And I look forward to when we actually publish that movie. Now, I'm not saying that cell therapy works for everything, and I'm not saying that Stephen Victor and IntelliCell or that anyone else can make a claim that says cell therapy repairs ankles. But I can tell you, as someone who firsthand who's experienced cell therapy, it's had a dramatic impact in so many elements of my life, both repairing my ankle, my sleep, mental acuity. Now, it's an N of 1, and you can argue that there's tremendous bias in that. On the other hand, Stephen, for example, has treated over 300 patients. And so there are many, many examples. There is mountains of clinical data that exist that suggest that cell therapy works. More importantly, though, if you're a cardiologist and a patient has come into your emergency room and they've been revascularized because they're having a heart attack, how do you offer them hope? Hope that they don't progress into congestive heart failure. You know, here's where excellent clinical programs are come into need, right? But it has to go beyond that. We have to know that the business approach of the companies are viable. So what I've asked the 4 companies that are presenting in cardiology today to discuss what is the mechanism of action by which their therapy works. We can talk about autologous, we can talk about allogeneic, we can talk about homogeneous, we can talk about heterogeneous, but let's see how well these companies understand mechanistically how their product works. What's the clinical plan? Is it viable? Does it make sense? Do they clinically understand what the endpoints are going to be for approval? And here's the last thing, and it's one that we haven't been focusing on as an industry. It's SWOT. It's the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. Is it viable? Does it involve patient convenience or a lot of patient inconvenience? Does it involve a very high cost of goods or a low cost of goods? I believe that the SWOT analysis are going to be hugely differentiating among the companies, particularly when we draw dividing lines between autologous therapy and allogeneic therapy. So, with that introduction, thank you so much for coming here. I think you're going to find the morning panels really, really exciting. And let's get the cardiology panel rolling. Thank you.